Jersey Devil is an RMC single rail coaster operating at Six Flags Great Adventure. This is the newest coaster to open at the park, opening in 2021, and this is the first single rail coaster by RMC to deviate from the cloned prototype layout. I believe it sets the standard for what to expect from single rail coasters in the future. So let's talk about the ride experience. The entrance for this ride is very far from the park entrance, being on the far right side of the park. For some perspective, it's across from Nitro. Unsurprisingly, there's absolutely no theming to this ride, but the station and queue do have some nice looking shades. When you get into line, there'll be a security guard that will make sure that you have nothing in your pockets. Absolutely no loose articles are allowed on this ride or in the line. Everything in your pockets must go into a storage locker. This is something that they are very strict about. I was once asked to turn my pockets inside out to prove that I didn't have anything in them. This is a policy that's consistent across every major ride at Six Flags Great Adventure and is something you should be prepared to deal with when at the park. Once you get into the station, the line will not stop moving, and this is because the train doesn't stop moving. The train will slowly move through the station during loading, and they do this to boost the capacity of the ride. Jersey Devil can only have 12 riders per train, meaning that hourly throughput is going to be much lower than the other coasters in the park. When I was at Great Adventure, it was not a busy day, but it did seem like Jersey Devil consistently had the longest line. When you board the train, the operator will pull down your restraint for you, and you'll go into the 130-foot tall lift hill. This lift is insanely loud. You can hear it from all over, and it's kind of like a beacon to let you know that the ride is actually running. Following the lift is the first drop. The first drop on this ride is one of its best moments. I don't think it's quite as good as the first drop on Stunt Pilot at Silverwood, which is the other single rail coaster that I've ridden, but it is still pretty good. It's definitely something that you got to experience in the back row. Something that is important to note is that you are unable to request a row. You get stuck with whatever row is available. I got very lucky with the seating lottery and often found myself near the back or in the front, but it is important to note that your experience on this ride is somewhat dependent on where you are in line. The first drop gets you to your max speed of 58 miles per hour, and that takes you into the first of Jersey Devil's 3 inversions, a dive loop. This element kind of fakes you out by going one way and then whipping you the other way, and that makes it really snappy and quite fun. After the dive loop is a massive airtime hill, which gives good airtime and the 0G stall. This stall gives some good sustained hang time and is really nice to look at. Following this is a turnaround, which oddly enough happened to be one of my favorite elements on the ride. It's super unique, and the turn is pretty tight, and you take it surprisingly quickly. There's also some good airtime as you enter and exit the turn. It manages to be one of the best paced moments on the ride. I'll talk about the pacing more in a moment, but just know that it's not great. Something that is great though is the subscribe button, and if you've been enjoying the video up to this point, consider subscribing. It helps out the channel so much. Anyway, once you get out of the turn, you go into a 0G roll and into the mid-course brakes, and this is where the ride really starts to fall off in my opinion. You take a slight turn out of the brakes and go into a banked left-hand turn, which is followed by a series of off-axis airtime hills. You take these hills decently slow, so even though they look like they should give you some wild airtime, they really don't. This second half of the coaster is really its downfall in my opinion. The pacing on this ride isn't the greatest from the start, but the second half is just really bad. The ride goes out on a very stale note, and that makes it feel kind of underwhelming. Compare this to the prototype model, which has some of the most insane pacing out there. It's just pure intensity from start to finish on those coasters, compared to this ride, which has a ton of downtime. And I understand that Six Flags may have wanted a more tame experience than what the other Raptor models were offering to make it appeal to a wider audience, but they didn't need to cut down the intensity this much. Honestly, it doesn't even feel like an RMC layout at this point. Another issue that I and a lot of other people have with these rides are the restraints. The restraints are essentially just Premier Rides comfort collars on steroids. They are uncomfortable, hit your neck, and limit how much airtime you can get. Something else that limits how much airtime you can get is if the ride is even open in the first place. It was constantly going down when I was at the park. I mentioned earlier that the lift hill being loud is kind of like a mechanism to let you know that the ride was actually open, and it's needed because how often this ride is down. I would consider this to be the worst coaster that I've ridden that's made by RMC. That doesn't mean that it was a bad ride. RMC is so good that even their worst coaster is still an enjoyable experience. I would give it a 7 out of 10, but this ride does make me a little nervous about the future of single rail coasters. I hope that they're not going to be heading in this direction, but because there's already a clone that's been built by Six Flags at Magic Mountain, it's kind of looking like that's how it's going to be. Something else that's at Six Flags Magic Mountain is West Coast Racers, and I have a whole video on that right here.